If you're enjoying haunted UK fiction, please consider supporting the show on Patreon or Ko-fi. Simply search for Haunted UK Podcast. The small tear in the skirting spread upwards across the mass of black mould, creating an aperture of flickering light. Robert placed his face in the hole to find a stone opening. It was a natural cave, a passageway of craggy sandstone. Robert balked at the discovery, amazed that he had never found it before. He knew Nottingham had been built atop a sprawling network of subterranean caves, but most had been discovered, mapped out, or else converted to pub basements or tourist attractions. He should have been excited by this startling architectural find, but one detail instead made his skin pallid and cold. There was a single flickering candle, the wax placed upon a sharp shelf of jutting rock. It had been placed here decoratively, and judging by the length of the candle, recently. Hello and welcome, dear listeners, to Haunted UK Fiction, a sister podcast to The Haunted UK, which features original flash fiction, short stories, and novellas with paranormal themes. All stories you will hear were written by a collection of talented writers, authors, and storytellers, both independent and professional. In today's episode, we'll be reading Spores, which was sent in to us by Lewis Darley. You may remember Lewis from the story he shared in Season 1, Blasted Heath. Lewis Darley is a Nottingham-based writer, illustrator, and videographer. With his short fiction, he always looks to combine the everyday with the strange and create unsettling stories with a sense of realism to them. His influences include Michelle Paver, Russell T Davies, Daphne du Maurier, Danny Robbins, Benjamin Myers, Rhys Shearsmith, Steve Pemberton, Blind Boy Boat Club, A.K. Blakemore, and Rosemary Timperley. Now get comfortable, grab a little something to sip on, or perhaps cuddle up under a blanket to help offset the chills coming your way, and let's dive into the story. Robert cursed his father as he painted the scuffs and boot marks from the walls and skirting. The house had been left to him. He hadn't needed it. He'd thought about selling it just to get the place out of his hair, but he had been convinced otherwise to rent it out. He wished he'd followed his initial instinct. Now he spent the first of every month chasing students for late rent, dealing with complaints and constant requests for repairs. The most recent crop of undergraduates left halfway through the month, seemingly in the middle of the night, without the courtesy of notice. Even their belongings had been abandoned, cheap IKEA essentials and drug paraphernalia. It all went in the skip, and so the cycle started again. A white pot of Dulux, a paint roller, whitewash what went before, rinse and repeat. Despite the many layers of paint, the presence of the previous tenants still lingered like aftershock. Many of the rooms smelled like an ashtray. cigarette smoke absorbed into the very carpets. There was a dampness too, heavy in the air. Condensation obscured the light through a kind of freckled prism. The students had complained before about damp and mould, but Robert had dismissed this as the entitled nitpicking of a younger generation. He'd emailed them to remind them that it was an old house and that windows still need to be opened in the colder months to allow airflow. Clearly, this advice was unheeded. Robert moved through the whole house, trying to determine where the damp was most prevalent. The heaviness in the air seemed worse downstairs somehow. Robert imagined parties, the sitting room packed with drunk teenagers, a throng of sweat and movement. No wonder moisture stuck to the walls like flypaper. There were still other checks to record aside from the overall condition of the property. Robert opened the small door for the cupboard beneath the stairs to read the meter. The smell hit him immediately, pungent and earthy. He stepped back in shock. The entire room was plastered with a glistening mould as black as pitch. It dropped and bled into the walls, buckling the wooden skirting. It smelled like rot, of decades of decay. Tendrils of fungus, tiny curled mushroom caps, had burst through the crevices and spaces pulled apart by the breaking wood. Robert gagged. The room would need to be professionally fumigated. It was not a task to be tackled with his own amateur knowledge or painted over. He wondered aloud how the students could have standed it. "Animals," he said, covering his mouth and nose with his forearm. He turned the light switch off, resigning the problem for another day, until he noticed a light still emanating from behind the rotten skirting. Puzzled, Robert moved towards the source of this new light. He pressed his body close to the floor for a more detailed inspection. The floor was wet to the touch, coating his hands. He placed his fingers behind the skirting and prized it apart. The wood crumbled in his hands. A small tear in the skirting spread upwards across the mass of black mould, creating an aperture of flickering light. Robert placed his face in the hole to find a stone opening. It was a natural cave, a passageway of craggy sandstone. Robert balked at the discovery, amazed that he had never found it before. He knew Nottingham had been built atop a sprawling network of subterranean caves, but most had been discovered, mapped out, or else converted to pub basements or tourist attractions. He should have been excited by this startling architectural find, but one detail instead made his skin pallid and cold. There was a single flickering candle, the wax placed upon a sharp shelf of jutting rock. It had been placed here decoratively, and judging by the length of the candle, recently. It suggested a deliberate intention, a sense of presence. Robert shouted into the tunnel, "Who's there?" He heard his voice echo, repeating his own inquisition back at him. He imagined this was an elaborate prank from the previous tenants. Perhaps they'd discovered the cave. But why would they venture so far into the dark? "I'm going to call the police," Robert said. "Seriously, it isn't funny. The mould down here, it could be dangerous." Then, from the darkness, an awful, low whisper. "Listen to him," the voice said. "He's worried about us. It's almost touching." "Who's there?" Robert called again. He thought he recognized the voice, the cocksure tones of one of his former tenants, Callum Hines. "Come and see," the voice called up. "We've been making renovations. You'll like what we've done to the place." Robert descended further into the darkness, his feet haphazard on the uneven stone staircase. The passageway narrowed, then opened up again into a cave the size of the sitting room upstairs. He was met by 4 standing figures, all spaced apart in a half-moon crescent, staring at him, arms draped to their sides, grinning. Their stance was precise, almost militaristic, patient, coiled, and waiting. Only when Robert moved closer to this semicircle did he recognize the faces of his tenants, the same four who he had thought had abandoned the property all those weeks ago. Callum Hines, Amy Jefferson, Tash Bradbury, and Anthony Lynch. "What are you—" He stopped himself. There was something about their eyes, how still and lifeless they were, glazed over and dilated. "We've been waiting for you," Callum said. "As have they." He pointed upwards at the cave ceiling. It had been dug deep into the foundations and earth of the house, dripping with soil and red clay. In the centre was a writhing mass of black fungus, growing with every second, pulsing. Inside it were what looked like to be flesh, great cuts of meat and bones. Faces, too, frozen in an expression of terror. Black mushroom caps sprouting through eye sockets, nostrils and gaping mouths. Robert froze. They were the remains of his tenants. He knew instinctively that the people standing in front of him, if they were people, were imitations, near-perfect copies of the real thing. The Callum copy was looking straight at him, and he wanted to run, to scream, to try and do anything, but he found he could not. He was paralysed with fear, and the copy seemed to know, circling around him in slow, pacing movements. "These bodies have such youth," the Callum copy said. "But we were hoping for something with a bit more life worn into those bones. Someone with some mileage." With that, he shoved Robert over, with an unnatural strength so that he fell backwards onto the stairway. He cracked his head hard on the rock, but the ground parted with a softness like pushing a thumb into an orange. From the soil beneath him sprouted hundreds of mushroom caps, writhing, blind, trying to find something to latch onto. Stems as thick as ropes tightened around his wrists, feet, and chest, pulling him further into the earth. Robert screamed as the coil around his chest pinched up, harder and harder, until his ribs gave way under the pressure and shattered. Smaller tendrils were penetrating his arms like cannulas, into his veins, wrapping around his bones. He was howling now, animalistic and violent. It felt as though something was boiling inside of him, a rat scratching its claws to get out. He could feel the fungus pushing from his stomach, forcing its way out of his throat. He vomited, spitting out this new growth. It came from his nose next. There was blood, hot and urgent, pooling everywhere. He could barely breathe, like he was being force-fed, a tube of hard plastic scraping and shredding his insides. There was an awful crack as the growing fungus broke his jaw, as it forced its way out of his mouth. The nose was next. The cartilage buckled inwards and sank into his skull. It saved his eyes, pulling his eyelids completely back, forcing them open. Whatever this organism was, it had a deep, malicious intelligence. It wanted him to watch. The Callum copy moved backwards, his arms spread apart, hands facing upwards, like he was in some kind of ritual prayer. The other copies followed. In front of them the ground parted, and new mushroom caps sprung upwards. They wrapped around each other, creating knots and shapes familiar and recognizable. Robert could see feet emerge from the rock, the leg bones sticking out of them, a pelvis, a rib cage, even what looked to be a kind of rudimentary nervous system threading into this new facsimile shape of a man. It was like watching a sculpture build itself out of marble. With the skeleton complete, it began to build muscle, grey instead of red, spongy and sinewy, building strength to the bones beneath it. The fungal skull stared at Robert, lifeless, as a face formed around it. Soon the grey sheen of this proto-flesh gave way for a more lifelike colour. Every detail was soon accounted for, the copy near indistinguishable from the real thing. Coarse black hair and stubble, thick smoker's fingernails, the subtle crooked nature of the teeth. Robert despaired. He was looking at his own body. The newborn copy stood naked in front of him, looking up and down at the man whose form it had assimilated. Only its eyes gave a slight distinction that there was something wrong. They were flat and dull, like the glass-beaded approximations of a taxidermy lion. He spoke with a gloating arrogance. "You feed off others," he said. "I imagine you'll feel quite at home here." The copy made a gesture, and the stems holding Robert to the ground made a sharp twist to his neck, killing him instantly. The creatures watched as the fungus wrapped around him, claiming him for the earth and stone. Devon couldn't believe her luck. Cheap rent? A great location? She would have happily settled for far less. She and her new housemates walked around the house, happily looking at each new room. Robert, the landlord, watched them. Devon felt uncomfortable underneath his gaze. It wasn't just the fact that he was an older man. She felt secure and safe knowing that she was amongst friends. It was just something about his eyes. The intensity behind the stare. Impossible to read. She was worried that the house was too good to be true, that once they signed a contract, they would find paper-overed cracks, broken appliances, or locks that didn't work. "Can you tell me why the last tenants left?" she asked. Robert seemed uncertain under scrutiny. "They were students like yourself," he said. "Dropouts, I assume. Never got to the bottom of it." "And they never said there was anything wrong with the place?" "Nothing," he said. Devon nodded, realizing that she was not going to get anything more from him. If these walls could talk, eh? She walked into the main living space, pretending to look for dust on the skirting, but really her mind was made up. The house was basically perfect for what she needed. Robert followed her like a shadow, clipboard in hand, clearly keen for her to sign over the paperwork. "What do you think?" he asked. She pulled a pen from her pocket and scribbled her signature onto the contract Robert was holding. "It's great, really great. There's a bit of a smell, though," she said. "Like mold. My mum said that it can be harmful for your breathing." "Not to worry," said Robert. "It's nothing we can't cover up." And that brings us to the end of this episode. We truly hope you've enjoyed this very strange, disturbing tale. If you'd like to hear more from Lewis Darley, you can find his short fiction on both his website and his own audio fiction podcast series called Crooked and Strange. Contact information and social media links are available in the show's notes. If you have an original story that would send a chill down our spines and you would like to submit it for review, simply send it in to hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com. That's hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com. Until next time, stay safe and take care.